The next talk is going to be really, really interesting. We've got one of our prior rock stars from last year's cyber event in San Jose, Steve Bay. He is here today. Well, first of all, most of you probably know the name Edward Snowden. Is there anybody that doesn't know that name in this audience? Steve was Snowden's manager. And for the first time today, he's actually going to publicly talk about what happened while he was his manager, what happened, and talk you through that. Because what he wants you to walk away with is how can you identify and prevent a similar type of threat in your own organization and be able to identify that and deal with it the way he had to deal with this particular situation. So, returning rock star, Steve Bay.
All right, well, it's good to meet all of you. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very grateful to be here today. I actually got called 2 weeks ago to fill in. I'm a bullpen pitcher here for this event, but I'm glad to be here. So as was explained, I was Ed Snowden's manager. I ran Booz Allen's NSA security or NSA Hawaii work and hired Ed to our company. He worked for me for about a month and a half before he fled the country, and I was fully engaged in the hunt and all the aftermath that happened with Ed. And as he mentioned, so when I was with Booz Allen up until June. I really couldn't talk about this situation while being employed by them. As you could imagine, it's a very sensitive subject for Booz Allen. But I recently left Booz Allen and am now the Chief Information Security Officer at a company called Nuvasive. They're a medical device company out of San Diego. They focus on spine surgery. So a little bit of my background, just to give you some introduction on who I am and what I do. My intelligence career started out as a Persian Farsi linguist with the Air Force. They have a training school up in Monterey, spent 2 years there learning Farsi. I got stationed at NSA in Maryland, where I translated documents. For any of you who don't know, being a linguist is terrible work. I was a translation monkey. You'd get a document, translate it, put it in another folder, and that was it. It was rough. But I did get some training in networks and technology. I'm not formally trained as a cyber person, as a network person. I've got an MBA and a Master's in International Relations. But I've done cyber for a long time. And when I left the government, when I left the Air Force, I joined Booz Allen, working on an NSA contract, and they put me in NSA cyber shop. And really from then until 2013, I was tracking hackers. I started out looking at intrusions and kind of swimming upstream, very similar to the kind of stuff Brian's been talking about in the previous presentation. And then I moved to Hawaii, ran our work in Hawaii there, and then looked at the cyber threat from a nation-state standpoint. And so it was there that I hired Ed. Also, after the fallout of the Snowden events, I couldn't work at NSA anymore due to various circumstances, and moved over to Booz Allen's commercial consulting side, and did that sort of work. So enough about me, but that's my background. Let's talk about Ed. And one quick note, again, this is kind of the first time I'm presenting this story out. I'd love some feedback to hear if this was interesting to you, if things you liked or didn't like. I also want to recognize a lot of you in the room, I'm sure, are big Snowden fans, and a lot of people, the country's very split on Snowden. A lot of people think he's a hero, and a lot of people think he's a villain. I am not a fan of Snowden. I do believe I have very negative opinions of him. We got along fine when he worked for me. I liked him when I worked for him. But I don't think what he did was heroic. I don't think what he did was anything good for our country. But that being said, I fully respect all of you, or any of you who do dig Snowden and what he's done. I love that you have that opinion, and you're welcome to it. I'm not going to, I don't want this to be a trashing your beliefs or your ideas or anything like that. But I do want to give you a perspective of somebody who was on the inside of it here. All right, so let me give you some background. So I met Ed in February of 2013. I had 2 positions open. I was looking for both highly technical people. I had one position where I needed somebody highly technical, kind of a cyber background. They didn't, the office that I was trying to fill the spot for didn't really care if they were had an intelligence analysis background. That's kind of the model that Ed fit. The other office was one that wanted both intelligence analysis and technical background. Now, however, Hawaii is not a very good spot to find technical talent. It's not a hot spot for that, especially technical talent that has a security clearance at the top secret level and a polygraph, which is what we were looking for. So we're kind of looking for that a very unique solution. And Ed was about an 80% solution. So when I met Ed, we interviewed him. He was an employee referral of mine. One of my employees referred him to me. We interviewed him at a Wendy's in Wahiawa, of all places. And the reason for that was we didn't want to interview him on site at NSA Hawaii because it's just inappropriate to do job interviews there. But Booz Allen's offices were down in Honolulu, which was a half-hour away, plus Honolulu traffic is among the worst in the country. So we figured let's find a neutral spot close to work where we could do it, and Wendy's worked great. So as we interviewed Ed, he was a highly technical person. He was very passionate about internet anonymization, as he's come out and talked about. He claimed to have run 2 Tor nodes out of his home. For those of you not familiar with Tor, it's a way to be anonymous on the internet called the Onion Router. And he also claimed to have known a zero-day vulnerability within Tor. I don't know if that's been verified or anything, but we were like, hey, that's pretty neat. So as we interviewed him, we have a set base of technical questions. Some stuff is we start out very basic, right? What are port numbers? What are IP addresses? Here's a trace route. How do you analyze it? Those sorts of things. It was clear as we went through these questions that it was all very elementary to Ed. So my technical director, who was there doing the interview with me, he's way more technical than I am, took over the interview and basically didn't ask this exact question, but it's kind of how I encapsulate it. Basically said, all right, I've configured a server this way. How do you hack it? And they basically nerded out for an hour. And it was really a fascinating conversation. I didn't try to interject too much because I would look like an idiot, but those guys really had a good time, and I was able to follow along. Needless to say, at the end of the conversation, we were both pretty impressed. And we both felt inclined, because of the nature of his background, plus the big need, to put him in an organization that needed an analyst and a technical person, not just pure technical, which wasn't a perfect fit for him, but ended up being good for us and somewhat good for us, as best it could be in the long run. A little more background on Ed. He was a Dell contractor before he came to Booz Allen. He was a sysadmin. So just the person who gave us the employee referral met him by having a computer issue and taking it to Ed, and they got to chatting, and then she got his resume and sent it to me. So Ed wasn't, I don't know if this is popular belief or not. Ed was not anybody senior. He didn't have any special accesses. He didn't have access, I'll get to in a little bit, to the PRISM program. He was a relatively junior person at the agency. And prior to coming to the NSA, he did spend a short time in the military, and he worked for CIA for a time, and I believe both in Europe and Japan. I've heard from a couple of sources, nothing verified, that it may have been as early as 2007, 2008 when he was in Japan, that this idea of doing this and taking this information sparked. So I don't have a whole lot of evidence of that, but that's just things that I've heard through the grapevine of across the intelligence community. All right, so working with Ed. So Ed started with us. We extended an offer to him at the end of February. And he started with us on April 1st. We ended up sending him to Maryland for 2 weeks for training because he didn't have intelligence analysis background. We needed to get him some, and that's where our top talent was. So we sent him for 2 weeks to Maryland. He got some training. He joined us on April 15th. So let's see. So we ended up putting him in a cyber role where he was kind of tracking hackers, similar to what I did in Maryland before I came to Hawaii. And again, he didn't have the intelligence analysis background, but the training helped a lot. And honestly, Ed's a very, very smart guy. If you haven't noticed, if you haven't seen the interviews, he's a very smart guy. I know a lot of people who are anti-Ed like to try to downplay how smart he is or downplay some of those sorts of things. That's not the case. He was a smart guy, highly technical. I'd say the only really negative character trait that I noticed was he was arrogant. But I mean, a lot of people are. What's the big deal? So I didn't have a whole lot of negative concerns about Ed. So he started with me at around April 15th. We never did talk about privacy in terms of any official capacity. He never complained to me about what NSA is doing, NSA programs. He never shared any concerns. An article came out a month or two ago from Vice.com all about how Ed informed the agency. I swear that was the longest article that said absolutely nothing I've ever read. I read it and I was like, not only did Ed never tell anybody anything about this, the article doesn't even say he did. It was kind of a strange, I think it was kind of a clickbait type article as I read through it. Anyhow, the one thing that Ed did do, though, is he loved to debate. He loved to talk. And so we had my technical director and a couple other people would do training sessions regularly to try to get him up to speed on intelligence analysis. And one particular night, they did get into a very heated debate, apparently, about the Fourth Amendment and about privacy and those sorts of things. But we didn't take that as anything more than just people being having the right to have their own opinion and having the right to share that opinion. We didn't think anything negative of it. We didn't think there was any likelihood of doing anything against the agency. In fact, he didn't mention anything about any suggestion that NSA, he was about to steal all this data. The other important point that I want to make is that Ed never actually had access to any of these programs that he's revealed. So the PRISM program, which was the very first program that was released on around June 5th or 6th of 2013 that The Guardian released, Ed never had access to that. I'd say I had 2 red flags that as I look back, that could have been red flags that really weren't red flags, but if I look back, maybe. And one was regarding the PRISM program. So we didn't call it that in the agency, but he came and asked me a couple times, how does he get access to that sort of data? I had access to that data. I could run queries on it. But the organization he was assigned to wasn't authorized to see that. And I explained that to him. And it was actually one interaction of that I had with him where I shared a little bit too much information that caused me to lose my access to the agency 2 or 3 months later during the investigation, something I didn't even remember. But he never had access to it. He never really understood how the program worked. He never understood the technologies behind it. And he certainly never understood the oversight and compliance and the hoops you had to jump through for any of these sorts of things. NSA took oversight and compliance and protecting civil liberties extremely seriously. We were trained on it constantly, over and over and over and over. Again, I can't speak for other compartmented elements of the agency, but the areas that I was in and the accesses I had, we were very, very strict on protecting U.S. person data. So late April comes along. He starts being late for work a couple times. And his government boss comes and said, Ed's doing a great job. He's really mentoring our people really well, training them up. But he's starting to come in late for work. I don't know what's going on. So I talked to him about it. And Ed tells me that he has epilepsy. And he's like, well, it's not the kind of epilepsy that, where you have seizures in the middle of the floor or anything like that. It's more as you're kind of sitting there, you just kind of black out. And so he said, that problem comes with driving. If I'm driving to and from work and I black out, I could crash and those sorts of things. He said, I don't know what's going on. I've had it for a while. We had it under control, and now it's starting to flare up again. So obviously, as his manager, I try to offer support. I'm like, all right, well, let's take all the time you need, make sure you get help for it. If you're going to miss work, just give me a heads up so I can let your boss, your government leads know. Those sorts of things. Kind of the standard operating procedure. So end of May came, middle of May came, and around May 16th or 17th, it was a Thursday or Friday, he contacted me, either came to my desk or emailed me, I can't remember exactly, and he tells me that the epilepsy is getting a lot worse. Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to be in all-day medical appointments, and I'm going to be out of work. And if those tests go bad, I'm going to have to take some time off work. This was the other red flag. This is the one thing that I did notice was really weird, is I said, all right, well, you have my support, hope everything goes well, feel really bad for you. I said it a lot more compassionately than that, of course, but let's get short-term disability in play. Let's contact HR and get that rolling so that you can get paid during this. He's like, well, I've gone through this a lot. Short-term disability is a pain in the butt. Not really all that. I don't want to deal with that again. I think I'm just going to go on leave without pay. I've got plenty of money saved up, which made no sense to me. It's not hard to get that going, and why would you leave money on the table when you can get paid for it? But to each his own. If you wanted to take leave without pay, take leave without pay. No big deal. So Monday, May 20th comes along. It turns out that was the day he flew to Hong Kong. And Tuesday, May 21st, parenthetically was my birthday, he emailed me and said, the tests have gone bad. I'm going to have to take some time off work. I responded and said, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me know what you need. Please get in touch with HR. Let's get you paid. Let's take care of short-term disability. And Wednesday night, the next night, he emails me back and says, okay, sounds good. I'll get in touch with HR. And that was the last I ever heard from him. So for the next 2 weeks, the next week and a half or 10 days up to the end of the month, I emailed him a couple times, tried to just logistically set things up, make sure we were, administratively taking care of time off and all that. He wasn't responding. It was crickets. And then the end of the month came, and timesheets were due, and I wasn't quite sure how do I handle this? A guy who's not responding, he hasn't submitted his timesheet. How do you handle this? So I called my boss, who lived in Georgia, and informed him that Ed wasn't responding to any calls. He's on medical leave, even though he hasn't filed any paperwork. We don't know what happened to him. And my boss smartly, thank goodness he did this, said, all right, well, I know typically it's not NSA doesn't really care a whole lot about medical leave, but I'm going to contact NSA security anyway, let them know that somebody's missing. And that really was a great move on his part, because Booz Allen, we really followed the protocol, NSA's protocol in those types of situations to the T. And it really protected us and Booz Allen and myself as well. So that was on a Friday, and next Monday morning I got a call from NSA Hawaii Security and said, hey, we don't normally, and again, this, looking back, I think they probably knew a little more than they let on, knowing that something was awry, because they called me and said, well, we're going to help you look for Ed, or for your missing employee. We don't normally engage, NSA Security doesn't normally help out on medical leave stuff. They're missing they're probably just at home, not responding, or those sorts of things. But we're a close-knit family here in Hawaii, and we want to help you search for him. So I think looking at that, in hindsight, they must have known a little something, at least that he wasn't maybe sick. So that whole week, the first week of June of 2013, we were hunting for him. I spent a little bit every day driving around the island looking for him, calling him. I called his girlfriend once or twice. No answer from either of them. And then I drove by his house a couple times. On Thursday of that week, I actually went around the island with an NSA security agent looking for him, to just trying to contact people that he might know. In my mind, I was worried he was dead. I was worried he had an epileptic seizure of some sort or blackout while driving on the island and drove off a cliff into the ocean. That's what I was concerned about. The thought that Ed could be doing any of this didn't even cross my mind. So it was about that Wednesday or Thursday that the Guardian story broke. And it was all over the news. Some of you may remember those days. I was blown away. It was a talk of the agency. And couldn't believe that this stuff was getting out there. And we really believed that it was all misconstrued and that the articles weren't accurate. And I still believe that to this day. So later, as we continued searching later that week, on Saturday, after kind of doing my rounds yet again looking for him, one of my best friend who happened to work with me and I went to church with him, we were chit-chatting about this situation, about my employee who had gone missing, and he made the comment, wouldn't it be crazy if Ed was the guy leaking all this stuff? And I thought, no way! There's not a chance Ed would do that. And then I made the comment, that'd be my worst nightmare. That would be my absolute worst nightmare. Turns out the next day, everything changed. June 9th. So that was a Sunday. I'm Mormon, LDS, and I was in the leadership of our congregation. And we call the bishopric, and I was in our bishopric meeting that morning. And I turned off my phone, obviously, to be engaged in the meeting. And I actually told a little bit of my hunt, just as introduction. We were just kind of chit-chatting before the meeting started to all the people in the meeting. I was looking for this guy all week, and then all this crazy NSA stuff. It's nuts. It's been a crazy week. And then the end of the meeting comes at 10 a.m. I turn my phone on, and my phone had exploded. And the first text I see was a text message from this friend of mine who basically, the whole text, all the text said was, sorry, man, looks like your worst nightmare came true. And I actually shared this story to a BYU Management Society about a month ago, and I got really emotional at this point, so I apologize. So I went and found an empty room in the church, and I broke down. Every negative thought one could have, I had. It was thoughts of, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to be blamed, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to lose my family, I'm going to go to jail, I'm going to be the scapegoat. What is this? I started thinking about, what does it do to NSA? What about all of our undercover agents? What if that sort of information gets out? What are people going to die over this? All of these things. Then I started thinking about my employees. I had a team of about 10, 15 people that worked for me. Are they all going to get fired? These are people relying on me for their jobs. So all this rush of emotion fell over me. So I gathered enough composure, I drove home, and I pulled my wife into our bedroom, and I broke down again. I just cried on her shoulder, saying it's him over and over, just in panic. It also happened to be my day to conduct the meeting at church. And so, my pride kicked in, I gathered my composure, I was like, I can do this, I can handle it, it's all right. So I didn't want to admit that I was that weak. And so I got up at 11 o'clock, church started, and I started conducting the meeting. I stumbled over everything, forgot certain words to say, half sentences. I was just a disaster. Ended up getting a text from my boss asking me to, saying he needed to talk. And I spent the rest of the day on the phone with all the Booz Allen leadership, and then spent about 3 or 4 hours with FBI in Kapolei, Hawaii that night. Surprisingly, the FBI dudes were totally cool. I was expecting, to be in that dark room with a hot lamp, right, shining on you, and like being grilled. They were really cool guys, and they just wanted to talk. And it was nice to hear, despite all those negative emotions that I felt earlier in the day, nobody blamed us. The next day, Monday, obviously very awkward at work. Damage control time, right? I couldn't back away from it. I couldn't hide. I had to own it. And so I went in. The first people I went to see was his direct government clients. And I was really good friends with those folks because that organization in Hawaii their parent organization was the one that I supported for a long time out in Maryland. So I knew those guys really well. Went and talked to them, and they were pissed, right? I mean, they were not happy. But they could only imagine what I was going through as well. So there's a lot of understanding. And I'd probably say the most apt comment, I was visiting with the director of NSA Hawaii, and he made the comment that, well, Booz Allen got caught holding a hot potato one time and ran out. And that's pretty accurate. He'd been planning this for a long time. It turns out, as he admitted later on, a few weeks later, he had targeted our contract directly. So somehow he figured out that our contract and what we did on that contract was the type of data he needed to get access to and wanted to get access to. So he targeted us. I've heard that perhaps that employee that gave us the employee referral coached him on the interview and the questions we would ask. Again, a lot of this is kind of conjecture, just in my conversations with people that I've worked with. So don't take it as gospel. But that's kind of how everything, just things that I've learned since. So that's kind of where we're at. So let's talk a little bit about Ed today. This is the part where those of you who are big Ed fans might not like this slide too much. So, but that's okay. I don't have no problem with people who think Ed's a hero. It doesn't bother me at all. Just different points of view on it. Okay, so one, I do believe that Ed has given up the goods to Putin, 100%. There's no doubt. I just don't see any way in which he couldn't. I flip the situation, right? If a Russian intelligence analyst came to America with terabytes of top secret Russian data and asked for asylum, I don't think the CIA is going to put him up in an apartment in Boise and say, have a good life. I think they're going to put him in an apartment in Arlington and park a CIA agent roommate with him and next door to him, and they say your price of admission is all that data. And there's no doubt in my mind that's exactly what's happened in Russia. So that's one of the things that really, really bothers me. And that's this quote by the head of German foreign intelligence as well. I also have been doing some research and reading on, and again, I haven't done I don't have my clearance anymore, so I don't have any inside information. If I did, I wouldn't share it with you anyway. But the damage he's done is immense. It is really, in many respects, at least from what I've read and what I understand, has close to crippled NSA's collection capabilities and potentially enabled terrorists are operating differently, nation states are operating differently because they now understand how the agency does what they do. Right? So the intelligence collection that we gather, the data itself, isn't the most sensitive aspect to it. It's how you get that data. And that's what Ed revealed. And the other thing I wanted to point out is I did do this analysis as I went through it. I looked at all the releases in that month of June. I think there were 13 different releases. Only 3 of those releases had anything to do with domestic collection. The other 9 or 10, there's 3 or 4, so the other 9 or 10 were legitimate foreign intelligence capability that was perfectly legal. And I would argue that the other ones were technically legal too, as they'd gone through all branches of government approval and judicial approval. But we can debate that another day. But again, that sort of analysis, as I think about it, that tells me his intentions weren't altruistic. But again, people are welcome to their opinions on it, and there's varying evidence on both sides. All right, so that's kind of the story of Ed. I could get into a lot more detail, but I wanted to try to keep it in time. But really, the point we wanted to share this, because this is a cybersecurity conference, is I want to talk about the insider threat, right? Ed was a massive insider threat. He was, in my mind, that ultimate insider threat. He is a person who had an agenda. He'd been planning this for a long time, possibly as early as 2007, as I'd mentioned. And I mentioned that he targeted Booz Allen in our contract specifically. There's no way Ed could have joined us on April 1st and thought, whoa, look at all this that's going on, and then all of a sudden decided he's going to just start pulling terabytes of data out of it and then flee the country within a month and a half. It's just not, I don't see any feasible way in which that could have happened. So what are some lessons we learned? Also, the other thing that really gave Ed an advantage was that he came from an IT shop to an analyst shop. And you can imagine at a place like any agency, anywhere there's sensitive stuff going. This even happens at companies like the company I work for. Segregation of duties, right? Your IT people are going to have certain accesses to certain data, or to systems, but may not have a whole lot of access to any sensitive data that they don't need to have access to. They're just making sure everything's running. Whereas in an agency's case or something like that, your analysts are going to have no access to the systems, but have access to the data. And that sort of separation is important, right? That's one of the ways they internally protect. Well, he was a sysadmin on Friday, and he was an Intel analyst on Monday when he came in. From what I've understood, what I've read in news articles, the agency didn't take away his admin privileges immediately. And as a result, he had super user admin privileges as well as access to the intelligence analysis. And as a result, he was able to flip a switch on removable drives and enable his removable drives. Right? Most places, hopefully, including your companies, hopefully removable drives are disabled, if not physically destroyed, but they were logically disabled. So certain things he was able to do because of just missed protocol that enabled him to do what he did. So Ed was really that ultimate insider. He had a plan. He got in touch with the journalists, I believe, in January of that year. So he'd been talking with people about it and kind of planning it for a while. He knew what he was doing. So, and obviously the damage that's been done is immense. So let's talk about what insider threats are and who are the insider threats. So the reality is your single largest vulnerability at your organization are your employees. It's the people that work for you. It's the people it's your HR person, it's your science researcher, it's your executive, because especially anybody outside of IT or security, because they're not thinking about security, right? They don't know anything about it. And so your largest vulnerability are your employees. So you can see this stat up here. A full 62% of end users say they have access to data they probably shouldn't see. And only 25% of the IT people in their companies monitor all employee and contractor email and file activity. Right? So there's a big gap between the amount of data that people have and what they should have, and then what is monitored and what is done. So that's a gap that needs to close. And too few companies are really recognize and understand the threat. So I started at my company 3 months ago now. So I'm brand new at it. I've been meeting with all levels of leadership, bit different business lines. People have no idea about technology. And I had some of our products guys talk to me and say, I'm not really sure I understand why this is important to me. And he ran all of our R&D. He was our R&D guy. And I kind of had to break it down to him. I explained to him the China threat and the Russia threat, this kind of stuff that Brian talked about just previously. And And as I kind of explained that to him, the light bulb turned on a bit. But there's people like that who they just don't think in those terms, right? So I'd argue one of the biggest risks we have from an insider threat standpoint, and the reason why your employees are your big threat, is because of email use and web browsing. So phishing is a big issue. From my experience, a significantly high percentage of the breaches in a company occur via email or web usage. Somebody clicking an email, an insider clicking an email, allowing a piece of malware to drop on a system, those sorts of things. So it's really important that we train our people on email use and web use. Another big area is unauthorized use of online file shares. This is the problem my company is dealing with right now. We, as a medical device company, have salespeople all throughout the country. And in the industry, there's only so many companies that do this, so it's very incestuous. So you go from one company to another company to another company. Well, why not? If I'm going to go to another company, why not just siphon off all of my data and as much information as I can and go to the next company, and that way I can get launched off on a great start, with this company. So, and a lot of the ways in which they do that is they'll post up to Dropbox or Box.com or OneDrive or Google Drive or whatever, and pull information off the network. Another big area and gap are lost or stolen mobile devices, where again, with like for our salespeople, they have all their sales data on, all our product data on there, and they leave a laptop in the car and they go out for lunch, come back, Windows broken, laptop's gone. So there are certain, those provide, that is a huge risk area as well. Now, the more damaging, though less frequent threat are your malicious actors. This is a Snowden type situation, right? So these are disgruntled employees, perhaps departing employees that I kind of talked about, planted insiders. I just gave a few examples here of just things in the news that I've been reading about. Just Last month, it was reported that an FBI techie admitted to being a Chinese spy. So they had a physical human intelligence person, probably wasn't even a human trained person, probably just a Chinese national that they recruited, that worked in the FBI and was feeding information to the Chinese. Sage is a company in Britain. They had a big data breach. An employee was arrested in connection with that and kind of enabling that data breach willingly and knowingly. Snowden, again, we can debate whether some people think he is an FSB person. Some people think he's altruistic, but just some of the things that I've read about him. Then the Sony breach, honestly, I'm still not 100% it was North Korea. I'll take the government's word for it. It seems a little fishy to me, but there has been some talk and questions on if, and even if it was a North Korean event, was an insider involved, considering the breadth of damage that was done. So malicious actors can do a huge amount of work, damage within a company. All right, so how do you defeat insiders? There's a whole bunch of different ways to do it, and let's start with I wouldn't say the easier problem, but somewhat, is your employees who are not malicious, your standard everyday employee. One, education and training is absolutely critical. You need to have some sort of mechanism in place to do online training, send out fake spear phishing emails, and kind of rickroll them, if you will. Hold town halls, just education, education, education. Get them thinking about how do you spot a bad email, because they're getting really good. We've had some in our company that were going to executives asking for wire transfers that from our CEO to our COO or CFO, that they were pretty impressive. And luckily we didn't fall trap to it, but they can be hard to recognize. So some things we can do is, again, awareness and training, and then you need to have executive leadership investment in cybersecurity in general. If your organization is one where you kind of get the, it's kind of important, we'll get around to it, it's going to be tough to get anything done. It's going to be tough to get the money for it. It's going to be tough to get the executive support to make changes. And they're certainly not going to be willing to change any significant business processes in order to support you securing the network further. But there are also a lot of technical things we can do. We can employ least privilege, ensuring that each individual only has the accesses they need to do their job. We need to be retaining logs and ensuring that we have some sort of audit trail that we can go back and look at what happened, and more importantly, which ties into the SIM and security operations, a way to monitor and detect off of those logs certain, not just intrusion events, which is what SIMs often are known for and security operations centers do, but build use cases and alerts that look for things such as a spike in data leaving the network, or amount of data going to unauthorized file sharing sites. In fact, you should probably just simply block and prevent the use of things like Google Drive or Box or Dropbox or those sorts of things, unless your company specifically uses it. I know a lot of companies today, for instance, are using Microsoft OneDrive to share files and work and that sort of thing. That's great. As long as it's supported by your company and you have security built around that, fantastic. But you need to be preventing unauthorized use of those other sites. Another big area is offboarding procedures. This is one thing that my company is terrible at, that I was appalled. Like my second week, I sat in an offboarding meeting about how I had a heart attack. But that our offboarding procedures are terrible. We rarely get, from the people who don't work in San Diego, we rarely get computers back. And so that's a cost issue, right? We're not repurposing our licenses, and we're losing computers. So it's a cost issue that we could be saving a whole lot of money if we were to do that sort of thing. But from a security standpoint, it's horrendous, because that information is just sitting out there. And the former employees do lose access to those computers. Our endpoint protections are pretty good, and our IT processes are pretty good. So they aren't able to log in, but it does cause a challenge. And then DLP. This is something I'm going to be, my company's really, all my executives get on me all the time. I'm worried about this person leaving and stealing all this information. How are we going to do it? Data loss prevention solutions, there's a lot out there. Symantec's got a good one. There's a whole bunch of different companies that do it. They'll install an appliance or a software on one of your servers that will monitor and do specific data loss prevention tasks that you can implement. So these are all different ideas. This isn't holistic, that you can do to secure your enterprise and your network. From a malicious insider, you're never going to be able to defeat a malicious insider 100%, right? Somebody's intent on doing something malicious, they're going to figure out how to do it. But you can make it really hard, and you can try to catch them in the act through a lot of these technical solutions, as well as the education and training may not affect the individual insider who wants to do the malicious activity, because they don't care. But if the people that work with them are more aware of the threats, it's kind of that see something, say something phrase that DHS likes to share, which drives me crazy, by the way, to some extent. But it's sort of that idea where, if they're more aware, they might identify strange activity that we can look into to defeat the insider. So those are just some ideas you can take away looking at your organization to how to protect yourself from insider threats. All right, so I like to give takeaways at these events. I like to make these things actionable. So one, remember that your insiders are your biggest threat. Remember that malicious insiders do the most damage. So make sure you employ an array of technical controls and monitoring. And remember that your average employee, no matter how awesome they are, they're most likely going to be your cause of insider incidents. So make sure that you have contents awareness and training, and make sure you have physical or technical solutions in place, as well as training solutions in place regarding phishing and web exploits. So that's my presentation. I hope it was interesting. There's my contact information. If you ever want to get in touch, you're welcome to connect up on LinkedIn or whatnot. So with that, are there any questions?
Hi, Sarah Fleischman with Microsoft, and I had a question. You were talking about the interview process. Was it really only just two of you?
Yeah.
Looking back in retrospect, have you changed how you interview people now?
Well, yes and no. So when I didn't hire anybody after that when I was running NSA Hawaii after that, because of just the fallout of everything. So yeah, I do prefer today to have more people interview and have a broader array of people looking into him or looking into the candidate. For instance, my current company, we probably have people go through 2 or 3 rounds of interviews. We have like 6 or 7 different people interview. I have a couple of tech people. I have one of my engineers that's like, his job is to grill him for technical expertise, but I also have security will interview him, and I've got other various people on the team to interview him as well. So I will say, despite what he's done, knowing what I knew at the time, I would have hired him again, knowing what I knew at the time, right? Knowing what I know now, obviously I wouldn't. But what I knew at the time, I don't look back and think, man, how could I have hired that guy? That was a big mistake in terms of just knowing what I knew, right? There's certain things that are outside of my control. So, any other questions?
What are your thoughts on having third or for-profit contracting companies working for the NSA?
Yeah.
For contractors like that, is the contract in danger for Booz Allen, or is that something even? Does that come up every so often?
Yeah, so it's still a sensitive issue for Booz Allen. We've had some issues with various contracts. Interestingly, this contract that we were on was never a threat. I think it depends on the performance of the contractor. Our contract had a really great reputation at the agency, and we took pride in being better than our government counterparts. What we did, we wanted to be an integral part of what the agency was doing, at least what they asked us to do. I think government contracting and for-profit companies, I have no problem with it. I do think it needs to be constrained to some extent. But the reality is, especially when you're talking about these technical elements, and especially on the cyber side, but anytime you're dealing with advanced technologies, the government has a hard time being able to pay talent what they know and deserve to get. So private companies are in a better position to be able to provide that. And so if a private company can get that better talent and bring them in, to the government to provide that service, why not? And there's just a huge competitive environment. There's a lot of people, myself included, I didn't want to work for the government. I saw the bureaucracy of it from my time in the Air Force. I had no interest. I wanted to be a contractor. I wanted to work for a company that I felt was going to be able to cut through some of the bureaucracy that I was able to avoid when I'm looking at my government counterparts. So there's arguments for both sides, but I don't have a significant issue with for-profit contractors, as long as, again, there needs to be a lot of oversight. They need to be strict in enforcing the rules that are upon them, and they need to actually be doing a good job. You got to be able to fire them if they suck. I mean, why? If they're doing a terrible job, don't keep them around. So that's how another hand come up.
Mike McCarthy with Domain Tools. I actually have 2 questions for you. The first is, you mentioned that the Booz contract may have been targeted. Do you guys have any hard evidence?
Well, he admitted that.
He did?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
he admitted that about a week or 2 after the thing. Oh, and I should also note, an article went up today. There's a website called thecipherbrief.com. A reporter just posted an article. I talked to her a couple of days ago, and they posted an article about me presenting here and some of this story as well. You're welcome to check out. Sorry.
Okay. And the second question, you mentioned that you had access to the PRISM program.
But yeah, we didn't call it that, but essentially.
Okay. You also mentioned there was a very strict oversight and compliance process in place. Can you elaborate on what that looked like at all?
Yeah, I have to. Yeah, I won't talk about the program just because of the classified nature of it. But the oversight and compliance, I had 2 auditors. They audited every query and search that I made to do my job. They audited, and anything that looked remotely suspicious, meaning I never and would never search a U.S. or a Five Eye partner for anything. But anything that looked somewhat out of the ordinary, I would get questioned on. And so there was a big process for that. And within the trainings that they give you, they hammered it home. You do not use this to search any U.S. person, U.S. company, or partner as well.
So if I understand correctly, Snowden had admin access from the role he was in before, and because that didn't get taken away from him, he was able to use that to...
That's my understanding. Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. If not, how about a big round of applause for Steve Bay?